We are live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Being 7 p.m., I will call to order the Plan Commission meeting for the Village of Jackson for Thursday, January 18th, 2024. Roll call is taken. We do have two members absent. One is excused. Item number 2 is approval of the minutes for the Special Plan Commission meeting from November 14th, 2023. Be looking for a motion to approve that.
If there are no corrections, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the Special Plan Commission meeting of November 14th of 2023.
Second.
We have a motion by Emmerich, second by Wilcox. Any further discussion? All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3, two-lot certified survey map for parcels V3053600F and V3053600G, Village of Jackson. Jen or Colin? This is the one where we had gotten revised.
This is a group project. I don't mean to step on toes. What you see before you, items 3 and 4 are related to each other, so we'll take it one step at a time. I will also be introducing the Plan Commission to another member of the audience that's been a part of project planning with staff, EDWC, and if you wouldn't mind, this is Brian Parrish, everybody, of Paradigm. Mr. Parrish is a part of our team and has given some feedback related to the CSM that we've been working with Engineer Kober on creating as well. What you'll see in the packet, it has a draft stamp over it. That is a past iteration of a CSM. What's before you tonight, and we'd like the record to reflect, is actually on page 2 of that supplemental we handed out to you at the beginning of the meeting. What's important about this before you and what was in the packet has more to do with the access easement that you see hashed around the property. There may have been some other non-significant differences between the two, but otherwise, by and large, it's important for the Plan Commission to understand that as this lot becomes divided or has been divided into 3 parcels, may be divided into a 4th that has more to do with what appetite exists in the coming year for other developers. We want to ensure that patrons and visitors have the opportunity to traverse the site entirely and not start creating some stub ends here and there and start locking people into lots. So it's going to take far more technical work, I believe, before we get it exactly as we want it to be. One exact example would be in that amended verbiage you have before you back to that first page. It outlines a conditioned upon amending the access easement on Lot 1 to properly align with the parking field. That might not be super germane to the conversation right now about the CSM, has more to do with what you're going to recognize in the site plan conversation. But if there are more technical ways that you'd like to understand that recommended condition of approval, Brian Parrish is here, I am here, and of course, Colin, who diligently assembles this entire packet for you all. We are each available to you at this time for that decision.
I guess for discussion purposes, I will make a motion to approve the two-lot certified survey map for parcels V3053600F and the other one too, right? The other tax key number? V30560G. To include the following items 1 through 5 in the packet. The property shall be conveyed to the buyer on or before February 23rd, 2024. The site plan approval shall become effective upon conveyance of the property to 250 Focus LLC. Approval by the village board of a development agreement and shared access agreement with terms acceptable to the board.
President Eckendorf, those are conditions for the site plan approval.
Never mind.
I apologize.
Okay.
You'll notice that there's highlighted font on the top third of that cover sheet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep, and I apologize for not directing you specifically to
All right.
that. If
All
you
right.
wouldn't mind considering that for your recommendation.
Sure. All right. So
Also,
just the
I
top
also
one.
may have one modification as well, if
Okay.
you may allow me.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, well, good evening. Again, my name is Brian Parrish, Paradigm
Oh, thank you. Brian Parrish, Paradigm Real Estate for Economic Development, Washington County. I'm a consultant for them, who's a consultant for Village of Jackson, making this really important project, your Village Square. So we're very excited, down to kind of the nitty-gritty planning details. So what Administrator Keller mentioned about amending the access easement on Lot 1 to properly align with the parking field for Lot 1. That should absolutely be part of your motion. The other part of your motion is that you'll notice that on the CSM, on Lot 3, there is an access easement. It's essentially a racetrack that goes around the entire property. So we just want to properly notice in your amendment that we are planning on recording this cross-access easement also on Lot 3. And Administrator Keller can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure that we're able to record this after the village board approves that. So I wasn't sure if the planning commission should have that in their motion as well. So my recommendation would be to add your language plus and access, cross-access easement on Lot 3.
And just to be clear, you're talking about the first motion item, still item 3 on the agenda, correct?
Yes.
All right, so shall we try this again? I will make a motion to recommend village board approval of the amended two-lot CSM for parcels V3-05600F and V3-05600G, conditioned upon amending the access easement on Lot 1 to properly align with the parking field for Lot 1 and cross-access easement to Lot 3.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Heckendorf, second by Emmerich. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
And just to clarify that, that's to be recorded on Lot 3, not just to Lot 3.
On Lot 3, yep.
Thank you.
All right, item number 4, review of amended site plan and other supporting documents for V3053600F for 250 Focus LLC. Now we can go to the bottom part. Any info to share on that, or?
I think just in general terms, the Plan Commission should be aware, the amended site plan itself was actually prompted by the request of the board, that the user of the site consider taking on that shared driveway access in their own site plans. And so the board asked, the user was willing and able to do so, and so the plan before you now captures that portion of land now in the development, the vision. What's important to know, though, is there's some additional language that's been added. That's the second half of that cover sheet memo before you all, because we wanted to take more time to review the lighting plan that's now been submitted, the landscaping plan you can see. We're thinking there might be more meaningful opportunity to add a little bit more than what's there, but I will say it all comes down to whether or not we arrive to an agreed upon development agreement and a shared access agreement that the board will look at later on in this endeavor, which makes this, again, a unique development project itself. But we want to give that thoughtfulness and opportunity to the Plan Commission at this point. Again, Colin, myself, and Brian Parrish are all sort of available for questions on this item.
Somebody willing to make the motion?
Sure. Would make a motion to approve the amended site plan for parcel V3-053-600F for 250 Focus LLC, conditioned upon the following. 1, the property shall be conveyed to the buyer on or before February 23rd, 2024. 2, the site plan approvals shall become effective upon conveyance of the property to 250 Focus LLC. 3, approval by the village board of a development agreement and shared access agreement with terms acceptable to the board. 4, additional landscaping shall be incorporated around the 2 shared signs and the shared driveway. And 5, up to 3 more lights shall be added to the shared driveway, with 1 at the northwest corner and 2 on the south side of the drive, subject to engineering review and approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Wilcox, second by Kripke. Any further discussion on this item? If none, all in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 5 on the agenda is ordinance 24-01, amending village ordinance section 6-54 pertaining to the maximum number of dogs per residence. I will make a motion to recommend the village board approve ordinance 24-01.
I'll second.
We have a first by Heckendorf, second by Emmerich. Any further discussion? All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6 on the agenda is review and consideration of zoning audit report. Tim Schwecky, planning consultant.
Oh, here?
Yes,
Oh, okay,
find a mic and.
okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm assuming you all have a copy of the report
Yes.
in the packet. Okay, good. So we were retained to take a look at your current zoning code and kind of look at different aspects of the code and come back with a laundry list of things for your. There's a lot of reasons for doing a zoning code audit. Obviously, state laws change over time. There's court cases that come along. There are best practices. There's, perhaps things that could be worded a little bit differently, a little bit clearer. The code could be organized a little bit differently. So that's kind of what we did, kind of the overarching. We looked at, high-level points for your consideration. The report includes sample language that you might want to consider. It's not saying this is code for you to adopt. It's just a sample so you can get a taste for what the recommendation is talking about. Okay? I could talk about this for a long, long time. So the question is, do you have any, questions, right off the bat?
Anybody have anything?
Okay. So should I take 5-10 minutes and kind of go over the high-level things?
Absolutely.
Okay. So basically, and I'm going to kind of go through some of these pages. So the first page, talks about the code organization. Okay. So essentially, you're creating a legal document that developers have to read and follow the terms and conditions of all the parameters within that zoning code. Okay. So you want to organize it in such a way that it makes sense. Again, it's a legal document. It doesn't read like a novel. They don't turn on the first page and keep on reading. So the way you organize it is very important for the information that a developer is looking for or a property owner is looking for in terms of their project. There is a potential way to, kind of reorganize your zoning code, and that's Appendix A. Kind of, lays out all the different articles. And I would note that your floodplain regulations are in a different chapter outside of the zoning code. So the thought is to bring, those regulations into that single chapter. Similarly, you have a section of your municipal code that talks about adult uses. There's nothing in the zoning code that talks about adult uses. So that needs to be brought in. So again, people can find the information that they're looking for. So that's kind of the organization of the code. The other thing is your zoning code really doesn't have a good list of land uses that are either permitted or listed as conditional uses. And in fact, that's probably one of the major, flaws of your code is basically, for some of your zoning districts, you say any land use can be brought forward as a conditional use. Okay? While that might sound, great, we'll basically hear anything and everything that people might want to do, but basically the way state law is set up with regard to conditional uses, if something is proposed that's listed as a conditional use, and again, that could be anything, as long as they meet the terms and conditions of the code, they are allowed. That's the way conditional uses work. So again, the way it's written right now, anybody can come forward with whatever. Slaughterhouse, this or that, or anything that you could think of, and, legally, you would have to approve it because you said so. So that's one of the things that you need to really fix right away. It's one of those fatal flaws that you haven't, experienced yet until somebody comes along and says, well, this is what your code says. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. There's another area of your code that basically doesn't allow anything. Can't recall what zoning district it is, but nothing is permitted, everything is conditional. Well, again, that's a fatal flaw because within each zoning district, you have to allow some uses by right. That's a problem. So land uses, need to be identified. A laundry list of land uses that are allowed within the village, either by right or as a conditional use. Just by way of example, Appendix B at the back of the report is a potential starting point for your consideration in terms of what that laundry list of land uses could look like. Again, this doesn't say what's allowed where. It basically says that someplace in the village these land uses are permitted. And then after that's kind of weaned down in terms of getting that master list of land uses all together, then you go through the task of identifying what's allowed where in what district, either by right or as a conditional use. Okay. So those two things, are kind of paramount in terms of, creating a legally defensible zoning code and allowing you to make legally defensible decisions when development comes to you. Any comments, questions about that? Again, that's kind of a big thing. Okay. On page 2 is an example of how you would organize that list of land uses. Again, this is just a sample. Essentially putting together a land use table where you have a listing of all the land uses. They might be grouped into different categories, but then across the top, you've got all your zoning districts. And then individually, there are cells for each intersection saying, is that use permitted or a conditional use or prohibited? And what this allows anybody to do is to find their zoning and go down and find out all the land uses that are permitted. The other way of looking at it is horizontal rows. So a business person comes to town, says, I want to do something, where can I go? This table answers that question as well. It's very handy, and it's really one of the main building blocks of a zoning code. You don't have that because you don't have a listing of land uses. Okay? Continuing on, I'm on page 3. So one of the things we always kind of look for is ways to kind of minimize the number of zoning districts. And you have a lot of residential zoning districts that probably, you might want to think about collapsing some of them because there's probably not a lot of difference between them. So again, you want to create, a simple framework for developer, property owner. And that's one thing that we always kind of look for. We don't make any specific recommendations. But on the surface level, it just seems like there's a lot of different zoning districts. Affordable housing, obviously, is a consideration. It's kind of a big thing in Washington County and elsewhere. So I'm looking at page 7. Something that you might want to look at is what's referred to as cottage housing. And it's essentially a high-quality, well-designed development consisting of smaller footprint, single-family homes. The single-family homes typically front on a common area. It could be a, park-like area. It could be an open space area for, playing whatever. And building this in your code kind of allows developers that option of, considering it in the first place, and then if it makes sense, to propose it as well. So cottage housing could certainly be incorporated into your code.
And if I may, Tim, another example of a type of housing that we're actually already familiar with would be those zero lot line twin home products. We've allowed through PUD zoning, something that would be more permanent and I would say useful to other developers that would like to do it, would just to simply create a provision for that permanently within the residential zoning district. So someone could come to Jackson, find land that's, not a sinking fund to improve upon and grade, and then apply the twin home or cottage home type zoning directly to it without having to sort of negotiate through a PUD process.
Any follow-up questions on that or anything else I've kind of talked about? Okay, then I'll just keep on forging ahead. Similar on page 8, we have a section talking about adaptive reuse. So, obviously, things change, I'm talking about institutional uses like churches and schools and those kind of facilities that may be hard to find another similar organization to come in and open the same operation. Schools kind of, consolidate, churches kind of morph and change. So the question is, what do you do with those buildings? And there ought to be, for your consideration, obviously, a provision to allow a developer to come forward with a plan specifically related to that property and proposed a new use. Not a school, not a church, but it might be something different. Allowing, that avenue is a great way to kind of repurpose those buildings. And the alternative is to let them sit, and that's not a good thing either. So adaptive reuse. Your code really doesn't have any guidance in terms of architectural design. That's a problem potentially for, property owner, developer to put together a set of plans, not knowing what the village is kind of looking for. So some basic standards, and again, we're talking about commercial, industrial buildings in terms of the form and function of what that building looks like. Very similar, on page 9, you really don't have any landscaping standards in terms of how many trees you want to see within a parking lot, on the perimeter of a commercial or institutional building. Again, for a developer to put together a proposal, they're not sure of what your standards are. So whether you keep them simple or complex, that's a decision that you're going to have to work through, but essentially having some standards for landscaping is, again, one of those things that a developer architect is going to be looking for to put together the site plan that you're going to be looking at. Page 9, traffic impact analysis. There are some large projects that just generate a lot of traffic. And having the information before you when you're looking at that as a conditional use or perhaps a project allowed by right is, how is this project going to affect traffic? Traffic flow, traffic turning, traffic safety. At some point, you need to, ask developer to come forward with some more details on how that project is going to affect the traffic in the area. So building that in is important so that at some threshold, then again, developer has to do that. And that way you have a more informed decision when they come before you. Okay, already talked about landscaping a little bit. I'm on page 11. So outdoor lighting. You don't have any standards for outdoor lighting, really, per se. And I know you've been dealing with some issues with regard to that. So having that within your code allows you to, make sure that a development isn't going to be impacting the neighbors or surrounding properties. So having that in code is obviously important, again, for developer and for the village when you're approving projects. Signs. So there's been a number of court cases, basically rendering most sign regulations across the country illegal. So there's court cases, Supreme Court cases, that says your sign code has to be content neutral. And that means that you can't regulate, or you can't use the content of the sign to regulate the sign in terms of height or size of the area. So you've got any number of existing standards that are not legal. Okay, so you can't look at the sign to say, based on that message, then these standards apply. So that's a whole area. Again, that's one of those big things that need to be taken care of. Any questions about signage? Okay. Design principles, page 11. So when you're looking at a site plan, you're asked to render some kind of judgment. Is this a good layout? Does this kind of make sense? And there ought to be in the zoning code a list of the factors or criteria that you're using to evaluate that site plan. In the absence of that, again, developers ensure what you're going to be looking at. And it makes your decision-making a little bit more defensible if in fact you have a listing and you can refer back to that as part of your process. Review procedures are pretty straightforward, but they have real implications for developer in terms of is a development project reviewed administratively, or does that have to go before the Plan Commission? Is there a public hearing? And all of those things kind of dictate how much time and effort that development project has to go through in order to get approved. So what you want to do is if you're looking at a code, is identify those areas where you can kind of streamline procedures, kind of give, perhaps more authority to the Plan Commission and or to staff to review and approve projects. Yep.
A meaningful application of this in review procedures is we have a lot of matters coming before you all that's a conditional use or a PUD, and it's an amendment. And maybe that amendment itself isn't, in the big picture, really going to require the Plan Commission review it, staff notice a public hearing, the public be noticed that the change is occurring, and then the board make a decision. A bad example could be the conditional use process we had been using for dogs. A dog may not need to be regulated in a conditional use part of the code. It could have been separate in a separate section. But nonetheless, if we're going to be looking at our procedures and how we're going to evaluate applications, the goal is to make it simpler and maybe a little bit more straightforward on the front end, so that way the Plan Commission isn't looking at everything in such a situational way repeatedly. And so that was sort of the goal that some of these sections would alleviate.
Page 14, and if I'm skipping over anything that you want to talk about, again, I just want to kind of highlight the most important parts. So specific land uses under state statutes, there's, sections of the code, state statutes that have been, essentially reducing the ability of a city, town, village, whatever, to regulate land uses, okay? Some of those are, basically as a result of, lobbyists going to the state legislature, saying, we are having a problem with this, please revise your state statutes. One prime example is wireless telecommunication towers, okay? So basically, again, your authority is much reduced in saying whether to approve or deny something like that. So again, your code needs to, recognize that fact. There's a lot of newer kind of land uses that might be coming along. They're listed there. I do call out adult uses. Sounds like something you don't want to talk about, but usually not. But page 15, adult uses, you have to allow them someplace. Again, there's nothing in your zoning code that says specifically where they're allowed. And then also, when you regulate adult uses, you have to, really focus on the negative effects of the use and not the use itself. So there is a real art to, framing those development standards as applies to adult uses with regard to secondary negative effects of that use, okay? And again, there's been many jurisdictions taken to task over their decisions relating to some of these, uses, including adult uses, only because they don't have the means within their code to really say no and make it a legally defensible answer. So adult uses, there's newer kind of uses. For example, a business incubator. Community gardens, you already touched on twin homes, that's already in your code. But again, just looking at the full range of all the uses that could occur, and there's just a listing of potential things that you could be adding to your code. Conditional uses, again, state statute changed in 2017, and it really put the onus on the jurisdiction to create a process that's defensible and to identify the terms and conditions and development standards for each of the land uses that might be allowed as a conditional use. And why that's important, again, is because if a use is listed as conditional, developer only has to meet the standards that are in your code. As a board, as a plan commission, as a village board, it's very difficult, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to impose conditions on a conditional use. So you have to be very careful again about how you craft the process and making sure that you're touching all the high points for each of the different land uses that are allowed as a conditional use. Years ago, conditional uses were reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and you could say yes or no. That's not the way it is anymore. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? I'm sure you've heard it before.
Yes, I would say just generally speaking, I think that it's important for the Plan Commission to understand that there's a lot of different ways that we can strengthen the zoning code, and I don't want to truncate your delivery tonight, Tim, to them. But the big message here tonight for everyone to know is that if we become a bit more organized, a bit more specific, and a bit more aligned with what's happened in case law, right? There's just naturally things that happen between the last time we've codified the zoning code and now. We are going to be in a much more efficient place. We're going to be far more black and white and clear to anyone coming to the village, that we're ready to welcome many types of different growth or developers. But ultimately, we have to say a little bit more of what we're looking for, so we're more transparent and accessible to someone who may call PUD, and I can't I can't say how much I care that this was said, and I'm not looking to be negative, but it's been called black magic in conversations I've had. And sometimes that's to the benefit of the developer. I won't say it's bad. But when it comes to having planning conversations with an applicant, you want everything to be as clear as it can be. And yes, there's going to sometimes be moments where someone will say, well, why do I need to put a shade on that light? Why do I have to? Are you trying to charge me more money to develop? The reality is we are trying to work through some sort of light issues from time to time because there's light spill. And so it's not to say that we're looking to charge people more to come to the village or regulate them more. We're hoping by clearing these standards up a little bit, we make it more of a straightforward process. And through that review process for you all, you know what standards to be evaluating based upon. And then that applicant knows from the get-go what the expectation is. And so there's less of a surprise throughout the process for them too. And the public can be a part of this. So what Tim has outlined to Colin and I is it's really important that when we're looking at how we make our zoning code better, we are looking from procedurally what needs to be better, but from the public's perspective, maybe they have input. They'd like to see other types of uses outlined as well. And so when Tim gets to the point where we'll talk about, what happens or if the plan commission's willing to let staff start working on this, is we'll come back with more of like a public input opportunity, how we'll get through the process that really does take 14, 16 months. This isn't something where we'll have a new product for you all in a couple months. So as Tim continues through his sections, just think, and I apologize for not really doing this as a tee up, but the reason this is all before you now is because it's taken time to truly understand, not just from me as the administrator's perspective or Colin. 6 years, Colin? You have it? 5. I've aged you.
Into my six.
I've aged you. Yeah, sorry. And through the development process we've gone through on our very own village-owned site, we're recognizing these metrics that Tim is trying to articulate to you all has been really important in us trying to market the development of our own site. We find cutting deals is better and faster when you say this is exactly what we're envisioning and hope for, because then everybody at the table is speaking the same language. So, Tim, I'm going to yield back to you, and maybe there's some questions based on that better,
Yeah.
maybe my better way of teeing you, but
Right.
that's the impetus or the reason we're all talking about the audit now.
And obviously, your code was written the way it's written for a reason, and it was meant at the time to be flexible, right? But flexibility can work against you because you really can't say no because, again, you're not sharing with developer what you're looking for. And you really can't create a basis for, having a legally defensible answer one way or the other. So it's kind of putting the village in the best possible position so that you can, work with developers and with the public so that everybody knows what the ground rules are. So again, there's a lot of things to, look at here. Bottom line is there's fundamental flaws with your current code. Talked about conditional uses, not having a list of what uses are allowed as a conditional use. Zoning districts without any uses. And, again, whether you, decide to, move forward on any kind of amendment is going to be a conversation you're going to be having with staff. But at a very minimum, there are things you need to fix. There's things that you can do beyond that to make, the code even better, best practices and more guidance. So.
Any questions?
I'll just make one comment. Thank you for going through the report. I thought it was well-written, very comprehensive. Sounds like it's coming at a very good time in the growth of the village, and, appreciate that. And Jen, you're teeing up, the overall objective of what we're trying to accomplish as well, so.
Sure.
Could I make a motion at this time?
Absolutely.
Yep, I would recommend that the village board authorize staff to proceed with the drafting of a revised Village of Jackson zoning code based on the recommendations outlined in the zoning code audit.
Second.
We have a motion by Wilcox, second by Emmerich. Any further discussion?
Just a clarification, so if staff goes ahead and starts making these changes, then everything will come before the public, plan commission, the village board, before anything's enacted?
That is the case. We'd particularly be focusing on, before doing all of it, more of like a, what did we call it, Tim? A public
Yes.
participation plan.
Right, so basically, when you undertake a project like this, it's gonna occur over 12, 14, potentially 16 months, and you don't want to lose sight of, what you're trying to accomplish. Neither do you want to lose sight of how the public can participate. So that public participation plan tells everybody upfront, we're working on this, and this is how the public can be involved, at what point, what role will the plan commission play, what role will the staff play, so that everybody knows upfront, the game plan for moving this forward.
Anything else? All in favor by saying aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Item number 7, citizens or village staff to address the plan commission. Seeing no one, be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And a motion by Emmerich, second by Kripke to adjourn. All in favor by saying aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.